Thank you so very much for your testimony. Thank you for your perseverance, obviously under very, very difficult and dire circumstances, and for being here to encourage us, give us a blueprint, as you all have done. Let me just ask, three of you have mentioned Section 1504 of the Dodd-Frank bill. To effectively implement it was mentioned, the need to implement, apparently the failure to do so, and I'm sure there's some reasons why they have not gotten around to do it, including court challenges. But if any of you would like to expand upon what you construe to be the holdup as to why that very important provision has not been implemented.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I'm happy to start answering that question. I know others on the panel can as well. The SEC actually issued rules, the final rules for Section 1504 in August of 2012. And they were very strong rules. They met the full intent of what Congress intended. Unfortunately, there was a lawsuit that was then filed by the American Petroleum Institute challenging Section 1504, and that was done in the fall. And so right now there's a court battle on that issue. And the court recently took a decision, the DC District Court recently took a decision that will require the SEC to go back and relook at the rules. But one of the things that I would want to really put into context with this is that as this is happening in court, the European Union recently adopted a transparency and accounting directive that is very complementary to Dodd-Frank. And so with the combination of the US and the EU now requiring mandatory disclosure, that covers 70% of extractive companies globally that are going to have to be more transparent. And that includes Chinese companies, Russian companies, American companies, and European companies. So I think there's overall a rising tide of transparency. I think the court battle is hopefully a temporary one. The law remains the law of the land, and the SEC, we hope, will move forward with finalizing the rule based on in the next step of the process.
Do you have a sense when this might be concluded?
No, I do not, but I know that the SEC came out with a strong rule, and I think very strongly defended why they made provisions in the rule, and so we're hoping that they will move forward quickly with issuing a rule. I think that we're going to see the fact that Europe, Canada also wants to disclose. They've announced their commitment recently. Switzerland is thinking about it because there's all this global momentum. I think that the pressure is really on the U.S. to keep on moving forward and not backwards.
Mr. Adam.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for this question. I think that the leadership the United States of America showed to the world in passing these provisions in the Dodd-Frank Reform Act is commendable. And I believe this was what influenced the European Union to recently pass a similar law. The United Kingdom and France have indicated that they want to fast-track the mainstreaming of the EU law into their national laws and to begin implementation of the law. And I'm just wondering if the EU was just taking a cue from the leadership provided by the US, why the US will lag as far as pushing the implementation of these provisions. And so I want to encourage you, and through you, the SEC, to also fast-track the process. If they have to bring out new rules, they should do it as a matter of urgency, because African citizens, citizens of African countries cannot wait any longer while corporate corruption with the connivance of our governments are plundering the resources God has blessed us with.
Thank you. Unfortunately, our courts move so slowly. We just had, from my point of view, a setback unrelated to today's discussion. But back in the beginnings of the PEPFAR program, I wrote a provision into the bill to preclude funding to those groups that were not overtly against sex trafficking and prostitution. And a very workable way of dealing with women who are in brothels was worked out by USAID. And despite that, it took 10 years for that provision to make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. I was there during the oral arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court earlier. Unfortunately, they ruled against the provision that I offered 10 years ago to the original President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and which was a true setback because I lead in this Congress on combating sex trafficking. And even during the oral stage, Justice Roberts asked a question, and I'm only saying this because fast tracking is something that once it gets into our courts, the chances are slim and none. Hopefully here it'll at least be slim. And that is that Justice Roberts asked a question, and again, this is unrelated, but just to give a further insight as to why your frustration, which is shared by those of us on this side of the dais as well, asked a very good question. He said if an organization was doing wonderful work on clean water in South Africa during the years of apartheid, and another group was totally against apartheid, one group, an NGO, was for it, and we made a choice to go with the group that was anti-apartheid, would that be constitutionally suspect or could it be allowed? And the lawyer for the other side had no good answer, and yet they've ruled against our provision. So, but it took 10 years, the point that I'm trying to make. Mr. Bolden, if I could ask you with regards to meeting with the farmers who were displaced, you mentioned that they were offered a cash buyout. Did they give you any indication how poor, how inferior, how lack of adequacy that buyout had? How little money was it?
I think if I can remember, I think it was about $10,000, which we all know isn't enough money to sustain.
For a farm?
Yes. And like I said, they were living off of their land, so that obviously is not enough money to sustain them. And I mean, just from my experience, I mean, I think it's unfair, but it's inhumane for people to be treated that way. To be literally living on top of a gold mine and have your land taken from you. And then the people that have taken your land from you comes in and makes millions, billions of dollars off of your land. So, I mean, we all know $10,000 isn't fairly enough, to be compensated for.
And it's your land, and it has the gold.
Exactly.
That has to be a double insult. Let me ask you, if I could, with regards to what are those people doing now? How displaced are they? Are they in abject poverty as a direct result of this? And did the government give any indication of trying to provide some kind of recompense to them?
Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to speak with government officials. We talked to the local officials, and yes, they are in poverty, which is the reason why a lot of the locals are trying to take to mining to even, put a meal on their table. And like I described in my letter, I had an opportunity to go through the entire process of trying to find gold. And trust me, it's not fun. But this is what they're reduced to on a daily basis just to try to survive.
Yeah. Mr. Alicante, you mentioned in your testimony, and you list how the president's family and friends have so egregiously benefited from the wealth. The son of the president of Equatorial Guinea has allegedly used several anonymous U.S. shell companies to launder more than $100 million of corrupt funds into the United States to finance a number of luxury purchases. DOJ, we're told, is investigating that. Do you have any insight as to how well the investigations, not just on his case, but some of these other cases, are proceeding by the U.S. Department of Justice?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question. Yes, we are in touch with some of the investigators in the Department of Justice. Our sense is right now the judges in both cases, mind you, in the U.S. there are two cases, one in California, one in Washington, D.C. The judges in both cases have required the DOJ to file additional documents proving probable cause and showing a direct link to Mr. Teodoro Ngema Obiang, Teodorin. In response to your earlier question, Mr. Chairman, about the holdup on 1504 and connected to this question, I think part of what we're hoping that you would do here is help create an environment in which transparency becomes an essential part, the quintessential part of U.S. policy with countries like Equatorial Guinea. I mentioned in my remarks, alluded to the Incorporation Transparency and Law Enforcement Assistance Act, which Congresswoman Maloney will introduce. I think that the Section 1504, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and several different tools are what needs to become part of how U.S. engages with countries or governments like the ones in Senegal, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, and others.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned in your testimony that the 2013 Africa Progress Report by Kofi Annan showed that Equatorial Guinea is richer than Poland, but has a child death rate nearly 20 times higher. And I know some years back the government and USAID had entered into an agreement, and some $20 million was spent on social programs. And I'm wondering if you could shed some insight onto whether or not that, and it failed, it didn't proceed and go forward, but whether or not, with all of that wealth, the fact that children are dying or having high morbidity rates is just appalling. Maybe you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Indeed, that is the situation, Mr. Chairman, in which there is vast amount of money coming from oil in Equatorial Guinea, and those of us from that country cannot understand why our nieces and nephews continue to suffer despite this amount of money. My sense is that the different programs that the government has claimed to have instituted have not gone anywhere. The government now has an economic plan, Horizon 2020, which is not even funded. The project that they have with USAID has not gone anywhere. So we don't know what the government is doing in terms of social development inside the country.
Let me just ask, and others might want to say something on this as well. We haven't mentioned China, and China certainly has been ripping off Africa. I mean, that's no excuse for the foreign multinationals, including those from the United States, that take advantage and fleece governments and the people by extension. But we know China, and I remember Greg and I were actually in the DR Congo on one trip en route to Goma, and we heard story after story of roads being built in such a way to ensure that the Chinese government was able to, again, extract minerals and things that they wanted, and the cost of that was the road, and whatever they found on the right and on the left somehow went into their pocket, and it's a huge problem. We know that Africa is looking for investment, and roads and infrastructure are at the top of the list, but the Chinese come in exchange for that work. They end up in a very bad bargain, in my opinion, because we heard about a number of them in DR Congo, get these very, very precious minerals and metals at below bargain-based prices. If you wanted to speak to that. And secondly, I would like to ask if you could, Karina, you mentioned, let me find it again, that you had numbers, actual numbers for DR Congo, 1.36 billion from the underpriced sales of cobalt and copper mining between 2010 and 2012. Okay, 1.36 billion was paid. Is there any estimate as to what the real market price would have been? How far below the real cost is that? So if you could speak to the China issue, anyone who would like to, and then to that.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. On the issue of China, just a few things on that. Global Witness has definitely looked at Chinese investment in the extractive sector in China because it has grown so much. We looked, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo at a resource for infrastructure agreement there and looked into how there was nearly $24 million of a Chinese government's signature bonus payment that were not answered as far as what was regarding that payment. So what we're finding is that though China is investing in the region, China is also vulnerable to these issues of corruption and conflict. And so any kind of corruption or conflict in these resource-rich countries can adversely affect China and their investment. And so one of the things that we're looking at, for example, is to try to engage with the Chinese government to raise their awareness about transparency and how transparency can actually help in their own operations. I was actually just in Shanghai in May to basically talk with some of the policymakers in Shanghai about the work that we're doing on transparency. The other thing is that I think we're going to bring in some Chinese companies to be more transparent through implementation of the Dodd-Frank Act. You'll have big Chinese companies like Sinopec and PetroChina that will have to disclose. So we will be bringing in Chinese companies that way. The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative actually does have Chinese companies already disclosing an EITI, and you have that in countries like Mongolia and Nigeria. So at least you're bringing in Chinese companies and to an extent the Chinese government and raising awareness about the importance of transparency and how that could adversely affect them. On the issue of the DRC and the selling of the secret mining assets, those assets, as I understand it, were sold at 1/16 of the value. So that was a huge, I mean, just tragically, what a loss to Congo to have their valuable mining assets sold at 1/16 of the commercial market value. So that's just an example of what happens when you have these secret mining deals. You have these deals done in secret, and you are basically allowing these companies sometimes companies who you don't even know who owns the companies enter into deals with government elites, essentially robbing the country of billions of dollars. And so that's why we're calling for transparency, not just of revenues, but transparency across the value chain. So you have transparency of bidding processes, transparency of contracts. We're hearing about how in Ghana contracts aren't made public. We're talking about transparency around who owns companies. Those are the kinds of transparency that we need that will hopefully prevent some of these really bad and harmful deals from happening. And we're hoping very much that the U.S. can help support more transparency in its foreign policy and through actively supporting the EITI and moving forward with Dodd-Frank.
Yes, Mr. Adam.
Yes, I want to touch on the China question. China's relationship with Ghana's natural resources is at 3 levels. First of all, the government of Ghana signed an agreement with the China Development Bank for a loan facility of $3 billion US, and that is the highest loan facility Ghana is ever contracted. But the difficulty with this loan is that it is collateralized against future oil revenues. And therefore, when the loans are not used efficiently to develop the country, future oil revenues and future development for that matter are compromised. But the difficulty around this loan also is that a Chinese company, China Bosal, has acquired a mining concession, what we call Awoso Mines, to exploit bauxite. And 2 projects that are to be funded from the loan contracted from China are to benefit China rather than Ghana. Because one of these projects is a railway line, which is to be constructed to the bauxite mine, which is now owned by a Chinese company to enable them exploit and transport bauxite. The second project is the expansion of the port where the bauxite will be shipped out. And both projects are funded from a loan contracted from the China Development Bank, which Ghana will have to pay with future oil revenues, and which, as I said earlier, will compromise future development. The second level of China's relationship with our natural resources has to do with small-scale mining. Our country's law does not allow foreigners to partake in small-scale mining. But the small-scale mining sector in Ghana lately has been dominated by Chinese workers. And we have recorded series of human rights abuses, destruction of the environment, which led to the government of Ghana setting up a task force of security agencies to arrest.
What kind of human rights abuses, if you could just elaborate on that? What kind of human rights abuses?
Human rights abuses in the sense that the communities who are living near the exploitation of these resources, their water is being polluted, their farmlands are being mined, and they are not able to prevent the Chinese workers from mining on their farmlands. And in some cases when they have complained, Chinese mine workers have used weapons against them, and we have actually recorded some deaths in those areas. So this angered the government of Ghana. That led to the setting up of a task force of security agencies, and 501 Chinese workers have been arrested by the government of Ghana, most of whom have been deported. But this has also brought about a diplomatic role between the Chinese government and Ghana, for which reason requirements for visa from China has been made more stringent. Some Ghanaian traders go to China to bring in goods, and therefore, because of the difficulties Ghana has faced, as a result of which Chinese mine workers are being deported, they have made stringent the requirements for acquiring visa to Ghana. There are some discussions between the two governments, but what the indication I get is that the Chinese are able to find their way out. And this is why transparency is so important. But beyond transparency, the need to support civil society, the citizens, who will bring pressure to bear on their government, so that their government is able to contract loans that will serve the interests of the country other than the lenders. And when I say this, it's not just the Awosu mine. Ghana is compelled to sell its oil to China alone. And therefore, as part of the loan agreement, it's an off-taker agreement for oil. We cannot sell our oil to any other country of our choice, except China. And so this is how they tie your hands. Through loans like this. And if the citizenry are not given the support and the capacity to voice out their concerns, to put pressure to bear on their government to contract good loans, the country will suffer eventually.
Just one small question. How long in effect will be this requirement of selling all of the oil to China?
Yes, until we are able to repay the loan. And that is supposed to take a period of 10 to 15 years.
Wow, okay. Anybody else yes?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would like to reiterate the points that Mr. Adams have made about the importance of civil society, because Equatorial Guinea is one of those cases in which transparency alone is not enough. Equatorial Guinea does not have an independent press. Equatorial Guinea has a Congress, a parliament that is 99% with the ruling party. Equatorial Guinea does not have an independent judiciary. Equatorial Guinea does not have a vibrant civil society. So the point that my colleague makes about supporting civil society, about building the infrastructure for good governance is critical. Before 1504, another EITI, another transparency mechanisms can be fully realized in a place like Equatorial Guinea. China is not invested in the oil industry in Equatorial Guinea. China is invested in the construction industry in Equatorial Guinea. But one point I make to people in the United States is that there is a certain reputational value that comes with operating with the United States. President Obiang and his government know that. But there is a reason why President Obiang spends millions of dollars in lobbying here in Washington, D.C. They know that it's important to keep their businesses with the United States. And that, for me, is a leverage point. That, to me, is why Congress can actually help address the resource course in a place like Equatorial Guinea, despite the threat of China. Thank you.
Ms. Bass.